David, nice to see you again, David.
Great name. Good to see you again. So we go from Hell or High Water to Outlaw King. What made you decide to take this on?
It's a project which I've been working on for a while. It's a great Scottish story, great Scottish hero, and I wanted to try and tell it in my way and to do it as honest to the history as possible, and to unpick some of the legends and to find the truth of the man and the story. And I got the chance to work with Chris, so I worked with on Hell or High Water, and continue the little journey that we started, making a kind of a loose kind of filmmaking together on this huge scale in my home country, with horses and swords and mud and blood and some romance, and it felt like a story that could really kind of come alive on a scale, and I'm really happy with the result.
How do you get ready for roles like these?
Well, David, we were doing press for our last film, Hell or High Water, and he gave me the script for Robert the Bruce, and I knew immediately that I wanted to do it because basically distilled down, it was horses, swords, and mud, which appealed to every 8-year-old fiber of my body. So I rode a ton of horses for 2 months before I left, and got ready for the slog in the mud, and swung a bunch of swords, and then met a bunch of guys that wanted to play pretend and
play pretend. It's so funny. Chris told me the same thing. He goes, my inner 8-year-old wanted me to do this because I get swords, I get mud, I get to ride horses. Yep. He actually told me too that we're going to bring up Hell or High Water, great film. This is amazing as well. That you actually started talking to Chris at Hell or High Water about doing something like this.
Yeah, no, we were doing during the publicity of Hell or High Water. I don't think it was in Austin, but I sort of slipped him the script and said, would you take a look at that? And he did, and he understood what it was. It was a complex character. He's got to take on a different nationality and all that, and do something very physical, and he embraced it.
Yeah, I mean, I was really intrigued to work with David Mackenize, and I didn't know really before I read this, I was just a huge fan of his, and he said, well, actually there is something that's got a lot of possible potential roles in there, and maybe we can find something. And at the time, James Douglas wasn't really much of a character in the screenplay, but it kind of came about through discussions, and the more research we dug, that he was quite a monumental piece of history and a fellow companion of Robert the Bruce. So it was great to be sort of a part of it and come on board and do exactly that. Ride horses and swing a sword above your head.
Had you ridden horses before, or?
Yeah, I had, but nothing compared to this. I mean, we had to look pretty damn pro and like one-handed with a sword swinging and jumping off and pulling people off, and you got to kind of learn some cool tricks with horse riding.
By the way, I like you. You're a cool dude, but your character, which means
blame
you did
the
your job well.
Yeah, well, I'm allowed to feel that way now too. I can stop judging. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's a really tough one to judge, because I spoke to David Mackenize, before we started the whole process, and I said, look, it would be very easy to just sort of paint this as hero and villain, and we've all seen that before, and let's face it, it can be quite tedious. And this is far more complex than that, he is a nasty piece of work, but look, I mean, he's a product of his environment. As much as the Scots are a product of their...
You're talking about David Mackenize?
No.
The director. No, David's great. No,
I'm kidding.
Well, I'm sure he's a product of his environment too. No,
Are we all?
Edward II. We are, exactly, yeah.
Right.
And his is a very particular one. I mean, for me to research the role of someone who's soon to become the King of England, and also understand the kind of political arena, but also within the realms of our story itself, specifically, it's incredibly complex. So I don't know. Yeah, he's a nasty piece of work, but there's a reason for that. I mean, his father mistreated him, which is quite clear to see. He wasn't the nicest man.
And you're not just talking about the haircut either.
It was a bold choice.
Well, he's executed his hairdresser. There's no doubt about that. Like, he's done.
What were the challenges? Because the battle scenes are extremely intense. This was a violent period. These guys fought, and you show that in this film. So the battle scenes, I mean, were there challenges to that? Tell me about actual filming.
Well, the big battle scene at the end, without giving the story away, it was a huge challenge just because the scale of it is very large, and we're trying to make it feel real and trying to make it feel brutal and true to what medieval warfare must have been like, which is pretty horrific. But also, you've got a lot of characters that you've got to make sure you're tracking, and show the way that it's all coming together, and try and engage with it and have a sort of full-on experience of what it must be like. So the filmmaking that I'm used to doing is very loose, and you're improvising, you're playing around with the material, and you're taking advantage of opportunities, which is great, but you could only do that to some extent when you've got some very controlled stunts. So it's a kind of balance between that freedom and the control that you need to make things safe and make things work as stunts.
This is a really intense movie, and that's good because these fights back in the day were pretty intense. I mean, they were violent and people were going at each other. What was it like to film those particular scenes?
Well, I think David's goal with it was to feel as chaotic and as immersive and as body numbing as it would have felt like. So he had 4 cameras on us at all times. You never knew when a camera was on you, and then he called action, and then you'd rehearse what you'd rehearsed, and God pray that you had a camera on your face while you were doing your business. It made for a difficult, often chaotic shoot, but that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to shoot action in a way that was not, he's a man that does not like inserts. He doesn't like an incredible amount of kinetic, chaotic cutting. He wants to keep you in it, just like that opening 8-minute tracking shot. So it was difficult, it was hard, there were longer takes than I was used to, but it certainly, I think, at the end, I hope the audience is exhausted and hopefully wanting it to end, because that, I think, is what war usually is. It's not usually romantic, it's just people die a lot.
What surprises you the most about, I'll be honest with you, Robert the Bruce, never heard of him. But now I can't stop reading about him.
Oh, wow.
Fascinating, but I'm just curious, what surprises you the most about this guy?
What's interesting about him is the thing that I think is fascinating about him is that he goes right down to the very, very bottom. He's got nobody left. He's kind of, he's taken the challenge. He's like, I want to be king, and then it's like you failed, mate. And he pulls himself back and gathers the strength of his immediate supporters, and then builds more supporters, and has the will and the strength of will to unite a divided country and push back. And that's a fascinating thing. Of course I knew that, but that comeback and the element of that comeback from right down to right up is something that is really special.
Just to rewrite history as it's to correct, Braveheart, the name ascribed to William Wallace, is actually the name given to Robert the Bruce and was stolen for the purposes of their film. When my character died, Robert the Bruce, his best friend James Douglas, carried his heart to the Holy Land in an iron box around his neck, only to be killed himself in Spain, both of whom were returned back to Scotland to be buried.
You can read as much as you can about Angus Og MacDonald, who in his own right was what he's called the Lord of the Isles, but the MacDonald clan were, arguably, they were the biggest clan in Scotland. He was a sailor. He was one of Bruce's closest allies. He obviously, this film goes up to 1307, the Battle of Loudon Hill, but he also brought 7,000 Highlanders and Islanders when they fought Edward the Second, Prince of Wales, who Billy becomes at the Battle of Bannockburn. So there was a great devotion between these two men. I did a little bit of a pilgrimage. I've repeated this before, but it's quite interesting. I went to Iona, where many of the lords, Scottish lords and knights are buried, and there's his sarcophagus there from the 14th century when he was dead, and it says, it's a sailing ship on it, I raised a glass of single malt Islay, because he's from Islay. And it says in Latin, one more push, Scotland's free, Lord of the Isles, my trust in thee. And those were words that Robert the Bruce had spoken about him. So a lot of the information that I gathered for Angus was very much related to Bruce, because they were very... they were close kinsmen, and also Angus in his own right on the island of Isla in the Western Isles. He was a king in many ways. You know, he was a clan chief. So yeah, but then of course, you know, the research that you do, Billy done, then you try to sew into the interpretation of the character. A little bit of yourself, a little bit of humour, a little bit of humanity, a little bit of gravitas, and quite a lot of brutality when it comes to it. But no, this is a dream role for me, and I think I don't think Billy would disagree, or a lot of the characters in this. It's a real joy. I mean, especially being a Scotsman, playing a character like Angus Og MacDonald, who's an iconic British, Scottish sort of historical figure that nobody really knows much about, and also this man as well, Prince of Wales, Robert the Bruce, the Black Douglas. The people have heard of them, but I don't think they actually know how they achieved their goals, which I think this film definitely sort of unearths, and so I hope people can relate to it.
All right, who had the best beard?
I would say I mean, I'm a pretty narcissistic, very kind of beard-centric man, but I can fully give adoration where adoration is due. And Aaron here had not only a beard that went vertical, but a beard that happened to fall horizontal too. So he had this incredible 3-4 dimensionality of a beard that I would say was my favorite.
You know, David Mackenize actually has a pretty good beard. He's
gonna
not
say,
in the movie, but
yeah, the one off screen had the biggest
Top
beard, right?
Mackenzie?
Yeah.
Old ZZ Top Mackenzie.
we took a vote. I talked with the cast, and we have decided that you have the best beard, even amongst the cast members.
Well, they all had much better beards when they were shooting, and they've all gone clean cut. In fact, some of them I hardly recognise, you know, without the elongated beards. But I'm keeping mine at least until the film is out.